was actually in the room where it happened. Join History Snob as we look at the hit musical Hamilton, the facts and fiction behind the catchy songs, and real history of the Great American Experiment, what it got right and what it kept hidden, including some very shocking possible truths about a certain sex scandal and purple urine. Let's not throw away our shot and dive in. Hamilton mostly revolves around the growth and consequences of the hatred between Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. This is true to history, as the two men were bitter rivals who fought constantly through various publications and historical meetings. In fact, Alexander Hamilton hated Aaron Burr so much, he created a whole newspaper just to slander him and other various rivals. The New York Post was first published in 1801, when the former Treasury Secretary needed an outlet to attack both Burr and President Thomas Jefferson. It must have worked, because the New York Post still exists today, making it America's oldest news outlet still in publication. Just as the show portrayed, the rivalry came to a head on July 12, 1804. After years of Hamilton slandering and challenging Burr in public and in publications, the two men agreed to settle things with a duel. The two figures met in Weehawken at dawn, guns drawn. The end result left Burr, the victor, in name only, as Hamilton's death at his hands left the man even more of an outcast among America's political elite. Only 3 years later, in 1807, Burr would be accused of treason for a different incident, and though acquitted, he was unable to ever hold any political office again. He reverted to his profession as a lawyer, where he remained until his death in 1836. But why did these two hate each other so much that they were willing to dispatch each other in an open drawdown? According to the musical, it was because Hamilton felt that Burr was a political opportunist with no real stance on anything. Broadway Hamilton starts friendly with Burr, but the two fall out more and more because Hamilton sees Burr as someone who was unwilling to directly fight for American independence until the winds of politics fully favored it. This is not fully true, and unfairly paints Hamilton in a more noble light than Burr. The truth was that the two men had wildly different politics when it came to what they wanted for the new nation, and Hamilton wasn't necessarily the good guy here. I'll expand on Hamilton's surprising political views later in the video, but for now, it's historical fact that the two men were diametrically opposed. Foes. Burr was a member of the Democratic Republicans, while Hamilton was a founding member of the Federalists. As is accurately shown in the play, Burr and his party defeated Hamilton's father-in-law during a contentious election for the US Senate. Hamilton took that very personally and began to attack Burr in public. The play shows that the two men had known each other very well beforehand. However, this is an exaggeration, as they had only met in passing before this event. It wasn't just the election itself that made Burr and Hamilton rivals. Burr had used insider influence with the New York State Legislature to, as Hamilton felt, usurp the position from Philip Schuyler. This left the Hamilton-Schuyler family very bitter towards the upstart political rival. Hamilton got his revenge, however, in the highly contested election of 1800. The final vote for president left a tie between Burr and Thomas Jefferson, as is shown in the play. Hamilton's endorsement carried great weight amongst the delegates, and in the end, he supported Jefferson. This came despite the fact that Hamilton and Jefferson had also been bitter rivals, while serving together under George Washington. Burr's formerly hot political streak hit a wall because of this, and he fully blamed Hamilton for his loss. Only 4 years later, they would both meet for the fateful encounter that would leave one dead and the other hated. But what about what Hamilton was able to accomplish before his death at Burr's hands? Again, as is shown in the hit Broadway show, Alexander Hamilton was indeed America's first Treasury Secretary, serving under President Washington from September 1789 to January 1795. Hamilton created America's first financial system and set the tone and rules that would be expanded on for the next 2 centuries. In 1790, he wrote the first report on the public credit, an important and influential document that suggested the reorganization of the national debt and the creation of a public credit. These recommendations would help the fledgling nation avoid a steep economic downturn. Now, viewer, you probably didn't come to this video to hear about the intricacies of a post-colonial American financial system. You came for the dirty, dirty sex. Yes, as portrayed in the play, Alexander Hamilton found himself at the center of America's first political sex scandal. In a tradition almost as old as America herself, a prominent politician was revealed to be having an extramarital affair with a younger woman. In this case, it was between Hamilton and Mrs. Maria Reynolds. Both were married, and over the course of about a year between 1791 and 1792, the pair would meet and engage in some political maneuvering several times. Just like in the play, they met when Reynolds approached Hamilton for some financial assistance while his family was away. This quickly led to the affair being more of a financial liability than Hamilton could have guessed. Maria Reynolds' husband collected evidence on the relationship and used it to blackmail Hamilton for upwards of $1,300 over a few payments. While that number sounds small by today's standards, that's actually the modern equivalent of roughly $44,600. Not a small sum for an orphan bastard in need of a break. Hamilton couldn't keep these transactions secret for long, and after being accused of financial misconduct, he made the bold decision to come clean with the American public. Again, as is true to the play, Hamilton published the Reynolds pamphlet. Another difference between the show and history is who first confronted Hamilton about the financial transaction. In the play, it's Jefferson, Burr, and Madison. However, in real life, these men were not directly involved. Instead, it was James Monroe, Congressman Frederick Muhlenberg, and Abraham Venable. It also wasn't just a polite visit to his home. The three men had already interviewed both a recently imprisoned Mr. Reynolds as well as Maria herself. The two shared a vastly different story about Hamilton approaching them both about an illegal scheme to defraud the pension of Revolutionary War veterans. James Reynolds had been arrested on charges of forgery, and Maria claimed that Hamilton had extorted the pair into this plan, as well as coerced a sexual relationship with Maria against James and her consent. In light of this conflicting testimony, some historians believe that the pamphlet was not a true confession, but rather a Hail Mary cover-up to hide Hamilton's own involvement in the crime of speculation. When he was confronted by Monroe, Muhlenberg, and Venable, he may have admitted to the affair as a way to refute their suspicions. All three men had a great deal of respect for Hamilton, so they agreed to hide the matter. But Hamilton would have rightly known that others could uncover the same information. In the play, Hamilton clearly suspects that Burr will leak it. However, since Burr was not directly involved in the scandal in real life, no such motivation would have existed. Still, while Hamilton avoided any possible criminal charges, he would now go down in history as the subject of the first American political sex scandal. Alexander Hamilton is undoubtedly the most explored historical figure in the hit Broadway show. However, he isn't the only one. One of Hamilton's biggest scene stealers is the Grand Royal of England, King George III. The king appears for 3 separate songs over the course of the play, each time chastising his US subjects for their fight for freedom. One thing alluded to in all 3 songs is just how mentally unstable the king was, especially later in his life. King George III possibly suffered from a condition called porphyria. The term porphyria comes from the Greek porphyos, meaning purple. That's because sufferers of the disease often have discolored urine. Yes, George III may have had purple pee. George III was also known to be full of inadequacy and paranoia, which may have been the result of a possible bipolar disorder or other undiagnosed mental illness. There is also a pivotal historical moment alluded to in King George's final song. When John Adams is elected as the 2nd president of the United States, George remarks that he is that little guy who spoke to me all those years ago. This is when John Adams visited France and England after the war's conclusion. In 1785, he had a direct audience with King George in the first official visit between the two nations. Adams later described the visit as one filled with pomp and ceremony, but one that also contained a strong emotional undercurrent. King George had lost the war for control of the former colony, and now standing before him was its first diplomatic envoy and future president. Adams spoke to George, assuring him that the now United States of America wanted to put the past behind them. The response was reportedly pretty frosty from the king, but the two nations did indeed rebuild their relationship. Back to Hamilton, who the play portrays in a very favorable light. However, there are things that have been left out of the Broadway show due to either convenience or ease of narrative. One of the biggest is Hamilton's family life. In the show, we meet his son Philip, who loses his life in a duel on the same spot Alexander Hamilton would face Burr years later. This is true. However, what is not shown is that Philip was one of only 8 children Alexander had with his wife Eliza. Philip wasn't even the only one named that, as they had a later child named Philip as well. However, something else that is intentionally hidden and even directly misrepresented is Hamilton's views and relationship with slavery. In the play, it's alluded that Hamilton is an abolitionist, and he even directly criticizes Thomas Jefferson for building his wealth on the back of unpaid labor. In real life, though, Hamilton possibly owned slaves himself. Members of his direct family certainly did, and Alexander Hamilton was directly involved in helping them purchase and sell those slaves at points. This has been uncovered recently in various financial documents the founding father has put his name to. Hamilton's supposed status as an abolitionist is likely a modern reinvention meant to soften his image. In fact, despite the assertion that Hamilton wrote like he was running out of time, he never penned any abolitionist material during his life. He instead most likely saw slavery as just another avenue to gain wealth and status after his poor orphaned upbringing. There's also the matter of what exactly Alexander Hamilton believed should become of a post-war America. The play talks about him speaking for 6 hours at the Constitutional Convention on what he believed a new US government should look like. However, it leaves out the details, and for good reason. Hamilton advocated for the United States to form its own dictatorial monarchy. He believed that the US president should be appointed for life and hold complete power over both the governing body as well as the populace itself. And that's truth versus fiction when it comes to the Broadway show. While it accurately portrays the events around the life and death of Alexander Hamilton, it omits his own beliefs and the subjects of his writings. It also hides inconvenient truths about his history with slavery and his infamous sex scandal. Still, you can't deny that the show is filled with great music, strong emotional moments, and a respect for the history surrounding the birth of a nation. Thank you for watching History Snob.